I remember when I first started getting into makeup and I wasn't having the best experience. I think that's probably because my influence at the time was Drag Race. So every time that I went to try and purchase a foundation, let's say, all I could think about was how full coverage is it? The further you go into the journey, you start to pick up different tips and tricks from different makeup artists, influencers, friends, family, all of that sort of stuff. And you realise that drag makeup looks really good on camera. Instagram makeup looks really good on Instagram. So when you're trying to pick a foundation match for your true life, when you're out and about down Tesco's picking up your weekly shopping, it gets a little bit more complicated. One of the first foundations I ever bought was this. Now this is the Rimmel Match Perfection in shade True Beige. See, it's just a sea of different shades of beige. This was far too orange for me. And I looked like one of those made in Chelsea types, and I wasn't a fan of that. So I needed to try and find something that worked for me. The journey's been long, the journey has been hard. But I've made those mistakes, and hopefully you won't have to make the same mistakes that I did. Welcome to Building a Foundation. Hello and welcome back to Matt H Does Makeup, a place where we play, experiment and make mistakes, because mistakes are how we learn. Yes! During this series, Building a Foundation, I'm looking at all the mistakes that I've made in the past and sharing some of the lessons that I've learnt on my road from then to now. Today we are looking at foundations, concealers and how to prime your eyes for eyeshadow. So we're building that base. Lots of people do this in different ways. Some people start with the foundation and then go into the eyes and then the concealer. I have a particular way that I do this, and this is only because I started doing eyeshadow looks before I launched into anything else. So for me, I prime the eye areas first and then go in with everything else. So let's start with the eyes. Priming your eyes means different things to different people. For me, I want to get rid of some of this redness. I also want to stop those oils from my oily lids coming through and breaking up that makeup, especially if you are wearing a bolder or brighter colour. I've worked my way through a fair share of eyelid primers in my time. e.l.f. do one, which was fine. I never actually got around to using their putty eye primer, which apparently was really good, but I just can't seem to get my hands on it anymore. Revolution do one as well, the lid lock, that is quite good, but to be honest, it just wasn't quite what I was after. And the products I've mentioned so far, they tend to be more... Let's see if I've got one. So here's one that I picked up, and I think this was about £3 from Superdrug. It's the Studio London range, the Colour Icon Shadow Base. The reason that I haven't got on with the products that I've mentioned so far, they're quite wet, they're quite damp. They dry down all right, but it just doesn't feel like it's got enough coverage for me, and it doesn't give me that clean base that I'm looking for. And in more recent years, I have been thinking about this a little bit more carefully. I've been doing a lot more research, and I came across one that the makeup artist Robert Welsh uses, the Sigma eyeshadow primer, and it's in the exact same shade Ignite. This is basically a wax crayon. And the reason this waxier formula works is because it does create a barrier between your oily lids and everything else that you're putting on. Now, some of you may have come across products similar to this before. Now, I'm no stranger to an eyeshadow stick, and this is very similar to that. It's very, very smooth to put on. It's also very smooth to blend. Initially, I go in with a finger just to make sure I've got that lid covered. And you saw I'm not using a huge amount of product either. And then what you can do is anywhere that you're thinking of applying eyeshadow, or anywhere that you might need just that little bit of extra coverage, because you may have seen I had a little blue vein here. And if I pop the primer all the way up there. And again, we're just using our fingers just to warm that sort of waxier texture up, make it a little bit easier to move around, and just blend that in. It's also really good to cover up any areas of redness that you may have, just like this. Boop, 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 boop. And you may have seen in some of my other videos, I cheat. I have, as you can see, quite dark bits here. They're not the darkest in the world, but you can definitely see them. We will be addressing this a little bit later on with concealer, but just to give that concealer something to stick to, you can use your eyeshadow base. You can also use an eyeshadow cream, Simple Do One, which is a brightening gel, but you can also use it to prime your under eye areas, which is quite nice. Now, when putting product underneath your eye, be careful, because the skin there is super thin. You don't want to be using too much product. You also want to try and focus where it is that you're applying it. So you see, I've just put that little bit there, and then using my fingers, just pressed that in. And you can already see the difference between the two eyes. So I'll do the same to this eye, and then we'll be back. So I've applied the base layer here, and what I'm doing is I'm just going in with a smaller, fluffier brush, just to make sure that we have got everything covered that we need, just to make sure there's no extra lines, any bits that I've missed, because I'm not the most competent person in the world. Okay, so now we have primed our eyelids and our under eyes and the side eye bits as well. It's time to make a decision. Now, when you're planning out what look that you're trying to go for, it's really important to have that in your mind just a few steps ahead when you're at this point. If you know that you might be using an eyeshadow that could potentially have some fallout, then don't do your face first. That way, if you do have fallout from the colours that you're using, you can just wipe it away. There's an age-old battle when it comes to this question. What do you put on first? Foundation or concealer? Well, in all honesty, doesn't really matter. The key thing to bear in mind is how much you are using, especially when it comes to concealer. You can always build, but it gets very difficult to start taking concealer away. Now, concealers, let's have a chat about concealers for a second. I have made my way through so many, and I can't stop buying them. I don't know why that is. I think I'm just a glutton for punishment. Let me take you through some of the favourite ones that I have at the moment, and because it's May, they are not very expensive. So the first one is the Maybelline Fit Me in shade 20. Now this, I do quite like this, but it does have a slightly sandier tone to it. As you can see there, a little bit sort of, it's approaching orange. And if you use that, especially I found in that inside corner here, I think it might just be a shade match thing, but it just doesn't quite marry up with the rest of my face. I've also got a couple of e.l.f. concealers, the Hydrating Camo Concealer, the satin finish. We have got Light Sand and Light Ivory. The reason I bought the Light Ivory is because I want to start experimenting with using concealer as a little bit of a highlight. The Light Sand I found is quite a good match for me, and because it's a hydrating concealer, you don't need to worry too much about that product drying up and becoming quite creasy under your eyes, as long as you don't use a huge amount, which can be quite tricky when the size of the applicator is like this. So let's go in with concealer first. We'll use the Light Sand shade first. We've got a big old splodge of concealer on the end. I'm going to wipe that off. Just to keep a little bit on the applicator there. And we'll go in with 1 dot, 2 dots, 3 dots. Top that one up a little bit there. And you'll see that I haven't gone right up to the waterline. There is a reason for this. Now again, same as the eye primer, take your finger and just bop that in place, because this is where I want that coverage. So I don't want that product to move. Well, not right. Well, I do want it to move, just not at the minute. So we're just going to settle that in, bring that down, and we'll do exactly the same over here. Now, e.l.f. do a concealer brush. It's basically just a fluffy brush. Any small-ish fluffy brush will work for this. Just give that a second to settle, and before it dries down too much, just going to start buffing and blending that product in, just to cover that area that I missed in the middle of my eye. You can see I'm not using any extra product, but that product is able to travel down here and into the corners of my nose. So I just like to cover that bit up as and when I can. So now we've got that concealer on both sides of the face, we can see how much coverage we've got. And then it gives us an opportunity to add a little bit more coverage on if we want to. Okie pokey. I reckon we have a crack at using the light ivory when it comes to lightness, darkness, effectively contouring your face. We're not looking at contour just yet, but working it into your base doesn't hurt. Light versus dark, not in a Star Wars kind of way. We're thinking about lights. We're thinking about how light interacts with light colours and dark colours. You will know on a very sunny day, you will probably want to be wearing lighter colours because the lighter colours are reflecting that light. Darker colours are going to be absorbing the light like a shadow. So lights, darks, lights, shadows. Light things are going to appear further forward on the face. Darker areas are going to appear further back. So using a lighter concealer will hopefully bring some of those areas to the front. Now, I've seen many a contouring guide where they draw a big old line down the middle of their nose and they colour in 2 brown lines next to it, and apparently it gives you a new nose. It can, but only if people are looking at you dead on. We're going to pop a little bit here. We're going to pop a little bit here. A little bit more. We're going to pop a little bit here and pop a little bit here. So we've got ever such a tiny amount. Ever such a tiny amount. And again, using a clean finger. Okay, and as you can see, it has effectively contoured my nose. Have I done it correctly? Not 100% sure. Does my nose look really long? Yes. So let's cut that off a little bit. We'll go back in with the darker shade of the e.l.f. Concealer, and just ever so tiny bit just there, and then just bop 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 bop. Okay, there we go. I think that has worked, but even if it hasn't, even if it's not 100%, it doesn't matter because we're only just starting. Concealer is on. Now we must do our foundation. Now, a big question some of you may be having is, how do you make this foundation work when you have a beard? This is a very good question. With great difficulty, but we'll get to that in a little while. First of all, let's get this forehead done. Now, when it comes to applying foundation, you've got many different tricks at your disposal. If your hands are clean, you can use your fingers. You absolutely can. Not like how they do on TikTok. 1, way too much product. 2, you know that they are not leaving the house looking like that after they're done. 3, it's so wasteful. It is so indescribably wasteful. And I'll even go out on a limb on this one, offensive, because sometimes the foundations that they're using are 40, 50, 60, 70 pounds, and they're using half a bottle to get a couple of million views on TikTok. Pisses me off. Rant over. How to apply your foundation? Absolutely. Use your hands if you want to. That's absolutely fine. It's actually quite good because you can be a little bit more hands-on with the application and you can dictate that coverage as you go. It's quite nice. It's messy, but it's quite nice. You can use a brush. That's absolutely fine. You can use a little beauty sponge like this. Couple of tips around brushes and sponges though. Depending on what kind of foundation that you're using, a flatter, quite dense brush is quite handy because you can dab, you can stipple, but you can also have quite controlled application. If you're using a thinner consistency of foundation, you might want to go with a slightly different brush, one that isn't quite as flat and dense, almost sort of, I've had them called like kabuki brushes. That might be a little bit too much. You might want to go in with a beauty sponge, a makeup sponge might be a slightly better option. And that's what we're going to be using today. So the foundation that I am going to use is the e.l.f. Camo CC Cream. I've mentioned this in a video before, it's got all sorts of bits and bobs in it. Collagen, peptides and niacinamide. The last video we mentioned large scary words. Collagen is a new one to this list. Collagen, think of it as elastic? Not elastic as such, but it helps your skin retain its elasticity. That's why you'll find collagen in a lot of anti-aging products. You can also buy collagen supplements and stuff, but just be careful if you are going down that route. It can be very expensive. If you stop whatever it is you're doing, be it anti-aging cream, supplements, any of that, the effects will wear off. It is not a permanent fix. But most importantly, growing old's okay. Having lines on your face is fine. I know we do makeup because we want to accentuate what we've already got or change ourselves into something else. But don't lose sight of the person that you actually are. Now, when it comes to applying a CC cream, especially because it is a thinner consistency, well, this one is anyway to some of the foundations that I've got, you might see people apply it directly to the sponge. You can if you want to. It is quite wasteful though, I will warn you. Because the product will get absorbed directly into the sponge, and we're not paying money for stuff like this so we can colour in our sponges. I found the best way, apply it to the back of your hand. You have a controlled amount, you know exactly where it is, and this is one pump. So let's see how far we can go with one pump. We'll start at the top and we'll work our way down. So because we are dealing with a larger surface area, I'm going to go in with the larger bit of the little love egg. Brief side note, these are supposed to be used damp, and by damp I mean you have put water in it, you have wrung it out until there is no water left. Damp. It gives it a nice bounce, because that's how we're going to be applying the foundation. So we've got the fat bit of the sponge, little dab there, and then we're going to go in. We're going to go in and just start moving that product, popping it on, bouncing it on, pop, 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 round we go. Now, I do get a little bit concerned about this shade. I think if I buy this again, I'll get a shade that is slightly less yellow, but I have found it does settle quite nicely. And because this is a CC cream with quite full coverage, you will find that a little goes quite a long way. And there we go. Forehead done. And only used a little teeny bit. Look at how much foundation I've got left. We'll move on to the cheeks. And we're not going to go right up to that waterline. And let's see how I've changed the position of the sponge, because I'm working in a slightly smaller area. Go right in to the nose, up to that beard line. Okay, so that is the first pass done. I will let you into a little secret though. The colour that you're seeing on this camera right now is not the colour it actually is in real life. In real life, this is maybe like 2 shades yellower than this. It's got quite a nice coverage to it. It's nice and even. And it does dry down quite quickly, which is nice because you get to see what it will actually start to look like. Okay, so we've done, I'd say about 3/4 of my face. I still have this amount of foundation left. The slightly more complicated bit for anybody with facial hair. Men, women, everybody in between. Facial hair is a thing that we have because we have faces. And when you're trying to blend in foundation to that, you've got to be quite careful. Because as you can see, you get this almost sectioned off bit. And then you've got no colour underneath your stubble here. It's alright if you've got a thicker beard, but if you haven't, like me, then you just look like you've only done half your face and you got rushed and you needed to like go out. So without putting any extra product on, we're just going to be using the product that is already on the sponge. And then we'll just dab that over the top just to try and marry that together. And again, you can see, without colouring in my beard, we've started to marry those shades together. Just bring that in to your ears a little bit, especially if you've got quite red ears like I have, because it helps to sort of balance out the tones. We've still got this much foundation left because we just used what was left in the sponge, but we haven't done our neck. This is where, oh, look at that, missed my chin. Now we're going to use the rest of this product, there it is, to fill in the chin. And that is a whole face and neck and beard done with one single pump of foundation. Don't get me wrong, you can go in with more. You absolutely can. It depends whether or not you're using a full coverage. If you want full coverage, if you just want a light coverage, maybe half a pump. You do you, man. You do you. It's also a really good idea at this point in your makeup application is to just stop. Just give yourself a couple of minutes, go make a cup of tea, whatever you need to do, and then come back. Because makeup oxidizes, especially foundation, and it will adjust the colour on your skin. So if you just keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going, you may find that at the end of the application, your foundation's a slightly different shade to when you started, and then it throws different things out of balance. When I first learned about setting, I was so overwhelmed. Again, I came from a background of being influenced by drag. So setting your makeup meant baking, where you put loads of powder on your face and you leave it there and then you brush it away, which can be good for certain makeup applications, can be really good if you are doing stage makeup, theatre makeup, because that stuff really needs to grip to your face and not come off. Now, I'm not against powder. Not against powder at all. In fact, before I did this, I put powder on my face because I am, see previous video, greasy bitch. So as an oilier person, putting a little bit of powder on before your foundation is actually quite a good idea. Slightly even out that oilier texture and just mattify the skin before you put any product on. You can also put a little bit of powder on top as well, especially a little bit in that under eye region. Again, super careful. Now, I don't have a huge amount of powders. These are the two that I've got. So you have a pressed powder here, the Fit Me Matte and Poreless. I bought this because it says matte and it says poreless. Two of the things that I want to achieve in life. It's called Tarte. I think it's Tarte. And it is called Smooth Operator Amazonian Clay Finishing Powder. And as you can see, it's a looser powder. This isn't how much I've used. This is basically how it was given to me. And that's all right. I don't mind. I'm not fussy. I'm not fussy at all. For the sake of this video, and in the spirit of experimentation and making mistakes, let's use the Tarte powder. So it's got this little sort of holy application type thing at the top. I think in a previous life it may have been a little bit easier to get out. So what I will do is I will tap some of that product into the lid, just like that. Oh, looks like a mouldy petri dish. Then I'll get a small powder brush like this and just apply just an ever such a small amount. I'll just press that into that area under the eye. Notice how I'm looking up. I'm tilting my head down, but I'm looking up. That's because I'm hoping to not put any powder in a crease, because that would be detrimental to what we're trying to achieve. And just to give our greasy face a little bit of extra mattification, I'm just going to pop it in those areas where I know I will go greasy first. So it is at this point in the makeup journey where I would start looking at maybe some contour, some bronzer, some blush. I would also be looking at finishing off the eyes, maybe adding a little bit of eyeliner, maybe even putting on a cheeky lash. But for that, you'll have to join me next time. I'd love to know some of your tips and tricks when it comes to applying foundation, and any of the guys in your life or guys yourself. Or if any of you out there do have any other advice when it comes to putting foundation on with facial hair, pop it in the comments below, because I think it would be really helpful, not only for myself, but for everybody else out there. Pop a little comment in. Thank you ever so much for joining me today here on Matt H Does Makeup. Make sure that you like the video, drop us a little subscribe, and more importantly, share it to someone that you love. And don't forget, you can follow me over on Facebook, Instagram, and I am on TikTok. I still don't understand what it means. To be honest, I'm sharing the same thing across multiple platforms, so if you follow me on one, you'll find everything that I'm doing pretty much. Right then, take care of yourselves. We'll see you soon. Bye.